Hello and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge amongst business owners, and this is part of our service to our Smart Room members. If you're not already a member or a BizSmart client and would like to access our archive of webinars, then please visit our website, biz-smart.co.uk, and go to the Smart Room page. Our host joining me today is BizSmart founder Kevin Brent. But before we start the webinar, can I ask you all to use the question mark function on your screen to post any questions that you may have for Kevin, and he will do his best to answer them all at the end of the session. Thank you, Kevin. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so this webinar this morning, we're going to be looking at something that Verne Harnish perhaps has called the X factor. And not surprisingly, we don't mean the Simon Cowell version of the X Factor. So this one, last time around, we dived into the weeds a little bit and looked at our profit and loss statements and all the finances. This one, we're very much getting our helicopter view with climbing right up outside the business and having looked down on it. So that's what we're going to be doing this morning, is looking at the X Factor, and that's going to be all around strategy. And you may recall that we've talked before about there being 4 pillars that need to be got right for any business that is going to try and scale up successfully. Those 4 pillars being, first of all, having the right strategy, and then being able to find, attract, hire, retain the right people, getting the right people then to execute the right strategy in the right way, and lastly, managing the cash. So those are the 4 pillars, and we're going to take a little bit of a look back at the strategy side of things. So we think about, you may know some of these statistics already, but across the world there are millions of businesses that start up each year. But even if we take just the UK, there are 600,000 businesses that start up every year in the UK. 40% of those businesses will die before they reach their 5th birthday. And of those that survive, something like 96% of them will remain as what are termed as micro businesses with less than 10 employees. And strategy is an absolutely vital component for surviving, first of all, those first 5 years and beyond, let alone actually trying to thrive, because many of us do simply just survive, and a few businesses will then thrive and break through that micro barrier and beyond. And one of the key elements within the strategy is what's been termed this X factor, and it is a term used by Verne Harnish of the Gazelles. And this is effectively your competitive edge, which is not quite the same as differentiation, but it encompasses differentiation. Everybody will have heard, I'm sure, about being differentiated in some way. So competitive edge, the X factor, encompasses some of that within it. So let me see if I can explain. So if we're planning on being in business for a reasonable amount of time and having a successful business, which hopefully most of us are hoping to do that, then we need to be able to build revenue growth, and we need to be able to build profit growth that are sustainable, profit growth being arguably much more important than the revenue growth. In order to create sustainable profit growth, if we look at it from a strategic perspective, then there are really, from a high level, there are only really 2 areas that this comes from. First of all, we can compete in attractive markets. We could be, and when I say attractive, I mean ones that generally are highly profitable. There are other definitions of it, but if we just take that as being very profitable markets, if we compete in very profitable markets, we could be average within that market, or in fact we could even possibly be below average in that market and still survive for a period of time. We probably won't go on forever, but we could certainly survive for a period of time. So competing in attractive markets is one aspect of the strategy. So where do we play, basically? The other aspect is what's our competitive position within that market. So if we're competing in double glazing and it's a not very profitable, attractive market overall, the economics are such that it's all lots of price driven, can we create a competitive position that means that we are advantaged compared with our competitors within that marketplace? So even though the market overall isn't great, we can do better than the average competitor and survive or even thrive within that. So those are the two components really of strategy, a very high level strategy. And in an attractive market, as I said, we may well be able to survive for a while, even if we're not advantaged. So this red triangle sort of illustrates really where we're not doing so well. If we're the other side of that red triangle, then we're likely to be able to create sustainable profit growth. So you can see that the red triangle does extend into the into the attractive market. So even if we could fail obviously in an attractive market just by being really disadvantaged. We could be really poor at what we're doing. But equally, conversely, we could on the flip side, we could be in a non-attractive market. But if we're really advantaged, there's still a segment of that triangle that's not red that we could make money. And clearly, what we'd love to be is playing in the top right-hand corner, playing in fantastically profitable markets, and being advantaged so that we're getting the best of all worlds. So that's really just a quick look at that. Now, your competitive position in creating an X factor, what we're trying to do here is create something that gives us a step up, a step change from what our competitors are doing. So, if we're trying to climb this rock face, yeah, we could try and get better climbing shoes. We could try and get better crampons or whatever they're called. I'm not a climber, as you might have gathered. We could look at improvements like that, or we could think outside the box and do something completely different that just gives us a huge boost over what the competitors are doing. And our competitive position, whether we're advantaged or not, is made up of two key elements. The offer position, so what is the offer, what's the value proposition, how do customers see what we're offering? So is it better than the competitors? Would people at the same price prefer ours over somebody else? Or even if we were more expensive, would they buy ours because it's better in some way? And the other side is the cost, and that's more of an internal thing. Can we make better profits than the average competitor even by selling at the same price, because we're so much more efficient? We can buy cheaper, we can make it either faster or at a lower cost, but we've got a cost advantage. So that if we want a competitive edge, it's going to come from one of those two things. So the offer position is how well, that's where the differentiation comes in your eyes of your customer. The cost advantage comes from more of the internal side of things. And as I said before, particularly if you want to survive in a not very attractive marketplace, you have to find a competitive advantage of some sort if you want to survive over the long term. So what is this X factor? Well, what we're about trying to do is use our company's unique skills and resources to implement strategies that competitors can't implement as effectively. And that's the idea, is do something that, because of the way that we work, because of the skills that we've got, internal expertise, we create something, we've got a wrapper that means that actually it's very hard for a competitor to copy, certainly quickly. And it could be in your offer position, it could be in our cost position, or it could be in a combination of the two. And if businesses that really find their X factor, then it can provide a significant advantage over the customers. So sometimes it can be we're not talking about a little minor improvement here. This can actually be a tenfold advantage over competition. So that all sounds really great. It all sounds really theoretical. So let's just have a look at a couple of examples. And I'm going to pick one well-known American gentleman and company from a number of years ago, just to illustrate it. And I'm going to pick a more modern, smaller type business as well, just to show that you don't have to be big business to make these sort of things work. They're both American examples, and I've chosen those partly because the information is out there, and also because when you find your X factor, it's not something you necessarily want to talk about. So certainly, if we work with clients and we find an X factor for them, we're not going to necessarily it's not something they necessarily want to shout about, because they don't want their competitors to copy. So picking a couple of well-known examples that are out in the public domain. And the first is a gentleman called John John D Rockefeller, John Davison Rockefeller. He was around in the late 1800s through to the early 1900s, and he was an American oil industry business magnate and philanthropist. He was widely considered to be the wealthiest. He's an attractive fellow here, isn't he? Widely considered to be the wealthiest American of all time and the richest person, or certainly one of the richest persons in modern history. And he found an X factor in his industry that allowed him to control the oil industry at the time. And at that time, the key to controlling the oil industry were the transportation costs, because it was very expensive to move the oil around, particularly by railroad. And what he worked on, and what he decided to do, the oil was shipped in oak barrels that the competitors were all using green timber. He decided to make his own oak barrels and have them kiln dried, and he reduced the weight, believe it or not, of these barrels significantly, which meant that he could reduce his transportation costs. In fact, he halved his transportation costs, which produced a huge advantage when it came down to it over his competitors. So, he thought outside the box a little bit, thought about doing something differently. He saw where the problem was, if you like, within his industry, where a big cost was, and he found a way to reduce that. So that's an example of a big business and X factor around the cost position and creating a cost advantage. So if we look to a smaller business and we think about mowing lawns, then here's an example, and certainly this was a small business, certainly to start with, and so we all know about having somebody come and cut our lawns, and probably most of us do it ourselves, but some of us might have somebody coming in to cut the lawns every now and then. So you could get a company in to do it. Now, what would typically happen, certainly happened at the time we're talking about with this company called Happy Lawns, is that you would find them on Google or find them wherever, and you would get them to come in, you get them to arrange an appointment with one of their people and they'd come out, they'd measure up your lawn, they'd probably put a spreadsheet together, might send you a quote by email. You'd look at the offer, compare it with others, and decide or not whether you were going to go ahead with it. And on average, that process would take up to 3 weeks. So it's quite a long process for not, at the end of the day, very much money that's actually coming back into the business. So a chap called Barrett Ursek founded Happy Lawns, and that's basically what he does, is do the lawns. And he managed, his rates are roughly the same as his competition, yet he managed to grow his business from 0 to 10 million in 4 years' time, in just 4 years. So how did he do that? Well, in 2001, he was really frustrated. He'd actually grown the business at that point, something like 2 million, but it had plateaued for 3 years, pretty much. And he tried everything to drive sales, but he couldn't find anything that would work. But he knew that something in the sales process, his 3-week process, was broken, that that was the thing that really needed improving. And that sales process cost him in the order of $300 and 3 to 4 weeks to acquire a customer that would probably only spend around $400 on average over the year. So not great. So it took, basically, with the company, where the company's gross profit only worked, it took six quarters or 18 months just to cover the acquisition cost. So he was struggling with this. He recognised it as a big problem when he bumped into somebody who mentioned aerial photography maps online, something that later became what we know of as Google Earth. No one knew about it at the time. He was ahead of the game. And what the aerial photos enabled him to do was to measure the lawn size and see significant landscaping issues like swimming pools and whatever else, but anywhere in the country without having to send anybody out to the property. And that concept completely revolutionized their sales process. So they could now give a prospect an estimate over the phone within 3 minutes, when it used to take 3 to 4 weeks. All right? So really simple. If we look at it now, we go, well, great idea, and would I have thought about that? Maybe I would, but at that time, nobody else was thinking about it. And he managed to patent that process as well. So he managed to protect it for a while at least. So that's an example of that translated into an offer and a cost advantage, because internally it was definitely a cost advantage for them. It slashed the acquisition costs, but from the customer's point of view, it also meant that they got a quote very quickly, so it was a better service for them, and it also reduced the time taken to compare other quotes, because actually probably it meant that they were able to close on the phone there and then in 3 minutes without having the customer or potential customer look around to other companies. So I think that's a great example of something really simple, just thinking outside the box and looking where the problem is in your business, if you like, or in your industry, not so in your business, but where the real challenge is, and then thinking of a way to overcome that. So how do we find our own X factor? So I should have gone on to that slide obviously there and shown the Google Earth map. But how do we find our own X factor? Well, we've talked before about asking these sort of questions to get something we talk about with the hedgehog type principle, which is all about focus. So, but 3 good questions to start with. This isn't the whole answer, but 3 good starting point questions. And what are we really passionate about? So what's our why? What is it that drives us? Why do we do what we do? Then, really importantly, what can we be the best at? And if not the best at within that core purpose or after, or if not the absolute best, really, really good at, so that we're one of the very best. And the third one is about really understanding what the customer wants and is prepared to pay for. So what's their real pain? Combine those 3 things together and you get a focus, because that will probably drive the market and the sector that we're going to be in, and it will drive the focus of how we're going to deliver within that. So that's the starting point. And it probably gets us to focus on a niche or a segment that we can own, that is aligned with our core purpose. But the next thing we need to do is think about a few questions that help us to identify effectively the bottleneck. So, and these are great questions to ask yourself, ask people within your business, your team, maybe even other competitors potentially, but maybe less so on that one. But what is the one thing that I hate most about my industry? In the lawn case, it was clearly the amount of time it took to put a quote together and the costs involved within that. In the oil example that I gave earlier, it was clearly about the high costs of the transportation, and that's the thing that both of them would probably say that they either hated the most, or if you ask it another way, what's driving you nuts within your business? Or the third way of asking it is, what's the bottleneck? What is the thing that is constraining the business that we just can't get over? It could be finding the right people, or keeping the right people. In some sectors, maybe in restaurants, things like that, the turnover of the managers is very high. If you could find a way to retain the managers, maybe that's the bottleneck that we want to do. And that bottleneck could be in time or cost. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be, but it's typically something that either takes a long time and is slowing the business down, or it's just a huge cost to the business. So that's what we're trying to get to, and those are good questions that will help you to uncover where you could focus on trying to develop your competitive edge or your X factor. And that, of course, is the starting point, because you then got to, once you've really identified that, you're then going to need to think outside the box as to how you can do things differently that would do it. And that's something that you've just got to work with your team to do and focus on it and think about it. But if you can find that, it will make an enormous difference to your business. Once you have found it, particularly if it's an internal, if it's around, let's just take that lawn business, an internal idea that he then patented, he's not going to go around shouting around that that's what we do, because obviously his competitors are going to then pick up on that, and there's a chance that they can copy it. So you want to keep once you've found that and you think that's great, you want to keep it relatively secret until you can, close to your chest, until you can fully exploit it. But nothing's going to stay secret forever, and even creating, even if you find something that gives you that advantage, then it won't last forever. So the bad news is that nothing lasts forever, but the good news is that nothing lasts forever as well, and there are lots of changes that are constantly going on within the industry. So the lesson there, or the thing to take away from that, is that we can't stop looking for things. We can't find one and just rely on it. Find one, exploit it, but then be prepared to think about what the next thing is, because as industries evolve and sectors evolve, then new things will happen. So that's basically that. There are pretty much unlimited ways to think about finding your competitive edge. The key, as with a lot of strategic things, is to pull yourself away from the day-to-day operations long enough to think broadly about your business without being constrained and right down in the weeds. Brainstorm with your team, bring in people from outside your business sector perhaps, because quite often what happens is that we get blinded a little bit and we just start to go, well, that's the way it is within our industry. Well, somebody from outside might just go, well, why is that? You say that, but surely, and it may or may not be possible to make those changes, but bring people in from outside. It could well be other business owners from other sectors, and having that sort of conversation with other business owners could prove to be incredibly enlightening. So there's definitely an X factor inside every business, inside of you. At BizSmart, sometimes we talk about releasing our inner eagle. So go release yours.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kevin. Excuse me. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Yeah, you've got one question from Duncan, and he asks, does my X factor have to be one thing?
No, not really. I mean, the examples that I've given, it was one key thing that made a huge difference. But quite often, it can be a number of smaller things that together add up to be something that's quite significant. So a few webinars back, we looked at the principles of scaling up and finding things that were valuable, teachable, and repeatable. When you look at your services and products that you do, sometimes you might create something by bundling things together. So it might be that on their own, these individual product services don't give you any kind of competitive advantage, but if you bundle the things together, then they might do. And it can be a way of doing things. We think of people like Honda are quite famous from having their constant challenge that they give people to improve by 1% in every area. That's almost become one of their X factors. They've got that constant improvement. So it's not like, yes, we suddenly made the engine lighter and that's it. It's a constant way of doing things that improve things. So, but it certainly doesn't have to be one key thing. You can sometimes combine things to create that competitive edge. Good question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think those are all your questions for today. Thank you again, Kevin, for hosting today's webinar. I will send out a copy of the presentation and Kevin's contact details out to you all very shortly. So if you do have any further questions, please email him direct. Before we close, just a quick reminder, this webinar is part of our service to our Smart Room members. If you're not already a member or a BizSmart client and would like to access our archive of webinars, then please visit our website, biz-smart.co.uk, and go to the Smart Room page. That's the end of today's webinar. Thank you for listening, and we hope you can join us again very soon.